Throughout the world, people go to extremes. There's amazing ingenuity and some stuff that's mind-bogglingly dangerous. Some people push the limits because they have to. Others because they choose to. In this episode of The World's Most Extreme.
Some of the first engineering that humans took on was the attempt to build some kind of structure we can live in.
In their countless forms, buildings protect people and bring them together.
Shining structures that reach for the sky and push us to our limits.
These are the world's 10 most extreme. Wind. It's the scourge of skyscrapers worldwide. And the taller the building, the bigger the problem. But a skyscraper in Taiwan holds an ingenious solution. Taipei 101. Named for its 101 stories. Completed in 2004 at a cost of £1.5 billion. For 5 years, it was the world's tallest building. Inspired by traditional pagodas, it was designed with 8 distinct sections, a number considered lucky in Chinese culture. But this tower needs more than luck. Huge tropical storms called typhoons can batter the country with winds of up to 150 miles per hour.
Typhoons are a regular feature in Taiwan. Typically, you'll get 4 or 5 typhoon systems coming through in any one year. You have winds that are destructive. They can bring down power lines, they can break windows, they can uproot trees.
But even a strong gust can make a building as tall as Taipei 101 sway. This doesn't just strain the structure.
When buildings start to sway in these high winds, at a certain point, people begin to feel it. And you don't want to feel like you're moving when you're 100 stories up in a building. It makes you feel a little seasick, and it's also just psychologically disconcerting.
Taipei 101's remedy for motion sickness is a tuned mass damper. That's a big ball to you and me. A $4 million, 660-ton steel ball, suspended within its upper floors. It's 400 tons heavier than the biggest jumbo jet.
It's a simple physics. You have a solid block of mass which is hung from a series of bridge cables supported by a frame structure.
As the wind hits the side of the building, it starts to sway. This causes the tuned mass damper to sway as well. But as the building swings back, the damper puts on the brakes by moving out of sync. The damper's huge mass absorbs some of the building's momentum, reducing the sway by nearly half.
It's almost as if you took a tuning fork and then you just touch it with your finger, and your finger absorbs a little bit of the energy, and that quiets down the tuning fork. It reduces the strength of those vibrations.
Tuned mass dampers are found in buildings around the world. But Taipei 101's is the biggest and heaviest of all. It can help the building deal with winds of up to 134 miles an hour. Here in 2015, during Typhoon Sudalor's 100-mile-an-hour winds, Taipei's giant ball shifts by 1 meter, the furthest ever recorded movement of a tuned mass damper. It may have been surpassed in height by icons like the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. But Taipei 101 is the building that just won't be swayed. You don't always need £1 billion to build a skyscraper. If you want a view like this, imagination is all you need.
This is what happens when somebody just builds and builds and builds without a plan, but maybe a vision.
Oh, and a lot of wood. In the wilds of Alaska, 80 miles north of Anchorage, Goose Creek Tower climbs almost 60 meters. It was built by attorney Philip Weidner. That's this chap.
Well, people ask me, why did I build it? And I always say, because I could and I wanted to.
That's cleared that up then. Philip originally planned a 2-story cabin, but the tower now rises 18.5 stories. And the only thing stopping him building higher is that it's only a few meters from hitting national airspace.
There probably aren't too many places where you can just keep adding more and more floors to your log cabin, but Alaska is kind of the final frontier in terms of allowing this sort of personal eccentricity.
There are huge challenges building any structure this tall.
Every time you do basically an alterations or an addition to a building, you gotta be careful with the foundation load, because perhaps the original structure wasn't designed to receive additional loads. You have to go back and make sure that the building can receive the additional loads from the add-on floors, or if not, the foundation and structure has to be reinforced.
Goose Creek Tower uses 2 simple methods to support its weight. An ancient technique called post and beam, which uses large, widely spaced wooden beams to create a supporting framework that everything else hangs off. And the simple step of making every successive floor a bit smaller than the last.
So what you're doing is you're minimizing the impact every time as you go up, both from just the weight of that elements or floors that you're adding, but also exposure to the wind forces. And naturally you end up having a tapered structure.
So, once you've built an airspace tickling 60-meter-high wooden cabin, what do you do with it?
I hope to put a radio station on it with probably I'm going to go back to Morse code and start broadcasting messages around the world. You know, just the truth. And if there's a way to do it, I may even try and start broadcasting into the universe, you know, and see what I can get.
The sky's the limit, Philip. The sky's the limit. Whilst some structures seem like flights of fancy, others are critical. This meter-wide, 2-ton blob may be the deadliest man-made object in the world. Just to approach it unprotected would mean certain death. Nicknamed the Elephant's Foot, it's a radioactive mass of melted sand, glass, and nuclear fuel. Deep inside the remains of Chernobyl's Reactor 4. The Chernobyl nuclear power station sits just over a mile from the abandoned town of Pripyat in the Ukraine. In 1986, a test on Chernobyl's reactor number 4 triggered an explosion, producing 400 times more radioactive fallout than the nuclear bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Thousands of people were affected locally, whilst air currents carried radiation right across Europe, from Belarus to the UK. 600,000 workers, called liquidators, were tasked to clean it up. But for many of them, exposure to high levels of radiation was a death sentence. Soviet pilots dropped thousands of tons of lead, sand and clay to douse the reactor's fires. But disaster struck time and again. When this helicopter hit a crane, the crew were killed. The reactor, which had reached temperatures of 2,600 degrees Celsius, needed to be sealed up rapidly to contain the radiation.
The Chernobyl meltdown was by far the worst nuclear accident in history. And afterwards, they quickly covered the remains of the plant with layers of concrete, but they weren't able to do a very good job. There's cracks, it leaks water, radiation can leak out of it, and over time, you can see that this concrete is going to disintegrate.
It's 2016, 30 years after the disaster. And as the original concrete shell cracks, radioactive dust could once again be blown across Europe.
They needed a better system to contain this radioactive mess.
Chernobyl will be a ticking time bomb for millennia. It could be considered the most extreme building in the world, but it's not our building number 8. This is the New Safe Confinement Arch, or NSC. At 108 meters high, it's taller than the Statue of Liberty. With a span of 257 meters, it's wider than the Colosseum. And at 36,000 tons, it's the largest movable building ever made. And being movable is essential.
So they needed to build a structure that would keep the radiation in, keep people and weather and everything else out. But they didn't want to build it right over the site because the workers would be exposed to too much radiation. So they built it a little bit off-site and designed this brilliant system of long skid structures to gradually slide it into place.
The NSC's vast double-layered shell, made of concrete and steel, is rigged on the inside with cranes and radiation monitoring systems to provide a safe environment to dismantle the old shell and manage the deadly waste. This incredible £1.8 billion structure is built to withstand tornadoes, earthquakes, and anything else Mother Nature can hurl at it. But to safely seal off the site, the NSC first had to be carefully moved 327 meters from its construction area to the reactor, without a hitch. It was a massive operation, involving thousands of workers of 30 nationalities, uniting to solve the 30-year-old problem. In November 2016, Chernobyl's Reactor 4, its radioactive dust, and the deadly elephant's foot was finally sealed off. Someday, the world's largest movable building will no longer be needed. And this area will be fit for human habitation again. But not for another 20,000 years. May 2018. Kilauea, which has been spewing lava for 35 years, blows its lid. Lava burns everything in its path. Surely this is the last place you'd want to build a home. On Hawaii's Big Island, 20 miles southeast of volcano Kilauea, is Kalapana Gardens, a neighborhood where people build their homes on freshly baked land.
Well, it's like nothing else. It's the newest land on Earth. It's these rocks, some of them are younger than most people. In fact, the lava out there just flowed 4 years ago. So it's just this fresh, new land. It's amazing.
I remember a couple came out and they go, "Why in the heck would you ever want to live out here?" That's what they thought when they first drove up. And then by the time they left, they went, "We get it, we get it." 'Cause
Yes.
they really felt it too, just the energy.
That'll be the millions of megajoules of energy from the massive live volcano underneath them. Rising 1,247 meters above sea level, Kilauea itself makes up the entire southeastern side of the Big Island of Hawaii. In 1990, lava flow from another Kilauea eruption swallowed up the original Kalapana Gardens, burying houses 18 meters deep in magma.
The Hawaiian Islands are these little dots of land that are actually constantly shifting in size and shape based on lava flow. They are active volcanoes for the most part, and that lava, it rolls and it cakes and it becomes hard and it becomes pieces of land, and it changes the very structure of Hawaii itself. And as Hawaiian Islands change from this volcanic lava, from this flow, people build on it, they live on it, it becomes land.
And cheap land, because where lava's flowed once, it can flow again.
We had an episode in 2010, July, that brought it within 50 yards of the house directly behind us here.
But are the residents of Kalapana Gardens concerned about their precarious properties?
Oh no, not at all. You know, I'm excited if the lava comes back to this area. It's an amazing thing to behold, and we have to adapt to it to a degree. I actually made my house to be able to move, so I can just load it up onto a truck if the lava comes.
And then it's just a case of waiting for that fresh plot of land to cool off again before you put your house back. 12,000 miles away, a volatile neighborhood of a different nature. Ponty City Tower. One of the most recognizable landmarks on the Johannesburg skyline. When it was built in 1975, it was intended to be a beacon of hope. But it became a well of despair. An extreme tower block slum. Ponty was constructed in the Hillbrow district of Johannesburg. For architect Rodney Grosskopf, the brief was simple: to design a building that symbolized luxury and prosperity.
You know, we had sort of chrome and glass mirrors, and it was very swish.
But Ponty's most striking design feature was its famous hollow core.
Every residential space had to have an external window. The core was developed out of this notion of a light well in the middle, and we loved it. 2 years after it was finished, Fair Lady magazine voted it as the second ugliest building in the country.
But Ponty had a bigger problem. It was constructed in apartheid South Africa. An economic boom had brought large numbers of European immigrants to the area, whose liberal ways were at odds with apartheid segregation laws.
A lot of people that were arriving from Europe back in the day didn't necessarily understand apartheid, nor did they respect its laws, and there was a lot of racial mixing going on.
The apartheid government didn't like it and cut the neighbourhood and Ponty off from the grid.
It means that you provide no more services to it whatsoever. If a pipe breaks in the street, it doesn't get fixed. Your rubbish just doesn't get collected. And most crucially, the banks that operated in that time in the 80s were not allowed to provide funding for any mortgages or development in these suburbs that surround Ponty itself. So a lot of people packed up their stuff and left.
Rents became astronomical, and the only way in which poor working class black families who were beginning to move into the inner city could afford to do this was to sublet and overcrowd in order to pay the rent. And I think that led to severe urban decline.
Thanks to the heavy-handed government, this emblem of hope became a 54-story underworld.
Gangsters took over this place and they made people pay rent to them by force. Gangsters' paradise, actually, you know. All the drugs, sex, it happened here. How can I say? It was a slum.
Even the innovative hollow structure, designed to let light in, now backfired.
The infamous core of Ponty, where trash was piled 15 stories high, people diving out the window into the core, became known as Suicide Central for a while. And also that sometimes, you know, people would jump into the core and not die, but maim themselves because they're falling on all of this rubbish.
In 2007, new building owners brought the money to clean Ponty up. So peace was restored to the iconic tower. The local neighbourhood still has its troubles. But Ponty is now one of the most secure tower blocks in South Africa. Manager Mapule takes security very seriously.
They follow the rules quite well. We don't play. You don't play. Okay, this is a system basically where everybody has to do their fingerprints to go through, or either they come out. So I'm going to do my fingerprint to go through. If you don't have one, you're not going through. And it's green, which means I'm going through.
Like the majority of current Ponty residents, Lucky is an immigrant, in his case from Zimbabwe. But life couldn't be more different than it was back in the 80s.
I'm very happy to be here. I don't want to move out. I don't think I'll move out anytime soon. You know? I want my kids to know this place.
I think Ponty is sorting itself out.
For 4 decades, Ponty City has reflected the extremes of South Africa. It's not quite perfect yet, but for this innovative building, there's light at the end of the tunnel. Even the tallest buildings are meant to keep us safe. Provided, of course, we're on the inside. Dubai and Hong Kong are 2 cities that epitomize our urge to build high. Hong Kong has over 7,800 high-rise buildings, more than any other city. Dubai has 12 of the world's 50 tallest buildings, including the current highest, the 160-story Burj Khalifa. Sometimes building high is about a lack of urban space. Other times, it's just showing off.
In a way, it puts many of the cities on world map by saying that they have one of the tallest building or the tallest building in the world. And in effect, you get the marketing free of charge. So it goes along with the building having the bragging right.
But this powerful advertising can attract the wrong crowd, who also like to show off. This is roof-topping, a dangerous craze where people climb to the tops of the highest buildings, just for bragging rights. Cities like Dubai and Hong Kong, famed for their extreme buildings, have become roof-topping trophies. These people take a huge gamble with their lives. And their competitive streak only pushes them to up the ante.
You know, a rock climber can get to the point where he or she feels totally comfortable standing on a 1-inch ledge 1,000 feet off the ground, just like you might feel standing on a sidewalk. And I think over time, that habituation to risk can almost convince people that they're actually a little bit safer than they really are. Maybe some of these roof-toppers have spent enough time doing this that they've overcompensated. They're now not taking the risks as seriously as they should.
It's an activity that should never be attempted by anyone. And if you're not convinced, here's some sobering science.
Hitting concrete at 200 miles an hour is not going to be a pleasant experience. You're looking at a force of hundreds or maybe thousands of times your body weight. It's going to be pretty similar to being hit by a flat-faced truck travelling at 120 miles an hour.
Experienced roof-toppers have been killed trying to prove their mettle. This one nearly joined them. In Hawaii, we've seen homes under threat from nature. And now in India, nature makes itself at home. Kani Mata is not just a Hindu temple. It's a house with more than 20,000 residents. Located in the northwest Indian state of Rajasthan, Kani Mata temple is devoted to its namesake, a Hindu goddess.
इस श्लोक में जो इनका इष्ट रखते हैं उनकी मनोकामना पूरी होती है वो जो चाहते हैं जैसा उसका फल मिलता है यहाँ आते हैं लोग बहुत इष्ट है लोगों को और ये आज से नहीं करीब 550 साल से ऐसा जो है
The legend of Kani Mata is, well, it's complicated, but to cut a long story short, each of her sons are said to have been reincarnated as one of these fellas. Rattus rattus, the not-so-humble black rat. Which means that here at least, these little squeakers are guests, not pests.
हाँ, बहुत अच्छे लगते हैं। इनसे तो इसमें वाइट चूहा जो होता है वो दिख जाए तो बहुत भाग्य है। वो आदमी तो अपना बहुत बड़ा नसीब समझता है कि मुझे करनी माता ने दर्शन दिए।
We'll be sure to keep an eye out for that white rat. Some families live at the temple 24/7, working in shifts to care for their pampered guests. But all over the world, we Homo sapiens have long shared our lodgings with these furry fellas, usually unwillingly.
When people first figured out agriculture and that they could store seeds, say the grains of wheat, over the course of months and years, those storehouses became very attractive to animals like rats, and they began to flock to these areas, multiply, and over time, certain types of rats have evolved, so they basically only eat the food that humans leave over.
But here at the temple, food like milk and corn isn't so much left around as offered up, in the hope the rats will bring luck and prosperity. For example, whilst in most places a rat sitting on your foot might be considered unfortunate, In Kahnimata, it's a furry blessing. But of course, the luckiest charm of all is to spot that elusive white rat. There she is. To Mother Nature, buildings can be both friend and foe. Concrete and steel, the primary materials in construction, are jointly responsible for around 10% of the world's CO2 emissions. To safeguard the future, some experts are looking to the past and a material that's been used for thousands of years. Brumunddal, Norway, 90 miles north of the capital, Oslo. Here on the shores of Norway's largest lake, Mjøsen, the world's most futuristic building, Mjøstårnet, nears completion. It will stand more than 80 meters tall. And it's made almost exclusively from wood.
It's 18 stories and will be the world's tallest timber building.
Used in the right way, these specially treated wooden beams, called glulam, can be just as strong as steel or concrete.
It's very lightweight compared to steel or concrete, but it's still very strong. I mean, you imagine a tree that grows over 100 feet high and can survive high winds. That's a beautiful building material. It's flexible, it can twist and bend. Those are all good qualities in a building material.
The supports used in the building are made from treated planks, processed and glued together to form huge, super strong beams. Those are then glued in layers to form the final glulam. Structural integrity doesn't just come from a material's inherent strength. It needs to be put together in the right way.
So here we'll take a look at one of the corner columns. These are the largest elements in the house. The compression forces in this column equals the weight of 1,000 cars.
Wood may be strong, but a major concern with any building material is how well it copes with fire. Steel can start to fail at around 600 degrees Celsius. But wood, surely, is just kindling. Well, Mjøstårnet's fire officer, Evan, is going to put that to the test. A wooden frame on the outside, with a miniature version of a glulam timber running through the middle.
Down at the base here, you can see the load bearing of this beam is hardly compromised.
The glulam timber survives, partly because it's been specially treated, but crucially because of its thickness. Fire carbonizes the outer layer, which actually insulates the interior against further damage.
So the char itself protects the center core of the timber that hasn't been exposed to fire from the fire outside.
But is wood really the future? Mjøstårnet's builders claim that it's not only sustainable, but actively protects the environment.
Wood is essentially made of carbon. You're locking up carbon that otherwise might get released into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. And so instead of using concrete or steel, which actually require huge amounts of carbon dioxide to be emitted while they're being manufactured, You've got a building that seals up some carbon in its structure and keeps it out of the environment.
The 18-story Meerstone may not hold the title of world's tallest timber building for long. Already there are plans for a timber tower in London that would stand nearly 1,000 feet high. It would be one of the city's tallest buildings and made out of wood.
What's amazing to me is wood, a material we've been using to build structures for thousands of years, also turns out to be one of the best modern construction materials.
When you build big, expect big challenges. Particularly when you're building so vast, it has its own weather system. Just 20 miles north of Seattle, Washington State, is Boeing's Everett factory. It's the biggest building on Earth. A roomy 13.2 million cubic meters. And it does need to be big.
The Everett factory is the place where the larger Boeing airliners, the 747, 767, 777, and 787, are produced and have been produced for several decades. The building is full of superlatives.
The factory was constructed in the mid-60s to manufacture the world's biggest passenger plane, Boeing's groundbreaking new 747.
Its original design was far beyond anything that had been done before for any sort of manufacturing hangar. You had essentially parallel assembly lines for multiple aircraft models happening under one roof.
Huge spaces with no columns and no walls are a challenge. 5 stories above its 30,000-strong workforce, the vast spans of uninterrupted roof need to support their own humongous weight, whilst transporting several tons in parts.
The biggest weight that you're supporting is a self-weight of that structure that you're trying to span. So the more weight you put in, then you need more material, and it becomes a vicious cycle. Engineers, they recognized going over centuries ago that trusses are very light, but also very strong and stiff.
A truss system transfers the force of the roof's weight through each length of metal and into the supporting walls, rather than dropping it on people's heads, which would be bad for productivity. Your next challenge in building big is if your giant structure starts to create its own rain clouds.
When it was first opened, this factory almost had its own weather system. Because it's so enormous inside and there are no dividers because there just aren't any rooms, it means the air is free to flow. You can get things like convection, where hot and cold air rise and fall and create circulation. And if there's warm, moist air at the bottom and cooler air at the top, what can happen is that warm, moist air can rise, and there was actually reports of clouds forming in the top of the building.
Rain isn't great for your aircraft electrics, so Everett quickly got this under control with an air circulation system. Ventilating a place this massive would involve a lot of pricey air conditioning. But if, like Everett, your doors are as big as NFL fields, creating a refreshing through breeze is, well, a breeze. Your final world's biggest building issue comes with the winter chill.
This building contains 13 million cubic meters of air. It would require something like 17 gigajoules of energy to heat up this entire hangar by 1 degree. That's about the same as boiling 50,000 kettles.
But Everett doesn't do expensive central heating either. Not when it can rely solely on the heat generated by its 1 million light fittings to keep it toasty. So the biggest building on Earth can make life cozy for its workers without that heating bill soaring. You'd think that the bigger a building is, the harder it falls. Mexico City, one of the most seismically active regions on Earth, is surely the worst place to build a tower block. But not this block. Standing proud in Mexico City's financial center, 55-story Torre Mayor seems like an ordinary tower block. But its sleek glass exterior hides incredible defensive engineering.
Mexico is just a terrible place for earthquakes. You know, the whole world is constructed with these various plates, these tectonic plates that move around and bump into each other. Well, Mexico sits on top of 3 of them, and one of them is diving down and grinding under one of the other ones. And that causes not only a lot of earthquakes, but some very serious earthquakes.
In 1985, Mexico City suffered its most devastating quake. More than 10,000 people died. It wasn't the shock waves themselves, but the collapsing buildings that caused most of the deaths. So if you want to design a statement building in this city, it needs to be earthquake-proof. In 1999, 14 years after the big quake, construction started on Torre Mayor. With 251 foundation piles driven 60 meters deep, keeping it pegged securely into the ground. But its most ingenious defense is borrowed from cars.
When we ride our car, we all expect a smooth ride. And that's coming from the shock absorbers in the car. In Torre Mayor, we took the same technology and applied it in the building skeleton.
A network of 98 hydraulic suspension arms are embedded throughout Torre Mayor. Their job is to absorb an earthquake's devastating energy. Gerald Ricker is Torre Mayor's Director General.
This cylinder is filled with a very high viscosity oil, and the end here is affixed to the structure of the building, as is an extension on the other end.
As an earthquake sends tremors through Torre Mayor, it flexes. The shock absorbers compress and extend throughout, absorbing the surge of energy from the shock waves and converting it into heat, which dissipates harmlessly into the air. Torre Mayor was designed to survive a 9.0 magnitude earthquake, a level of activity that releases as much energy as 25,000 nuclear bombs. On the 19th of September 2017, Torre Mayor's shock absorbers were put to the test. A 7.1 magnitude earthquake struck 30 miles beneath the surface and 75 miles southeast of Mexico City. Shock waves ripped through the capital. The several thousand people in Torre Mayor held their breath.
The alarms went off, the building started to sway slightly. We were in about 7.2, 7.3, and we were looking out the window that I'm looking out at this precise moment. And there were puffs of what appeared to be smoke, but there were buildings that were collapsing.
Around the city, nearly 50 buildings collapsed, and at least 200 people were killed. But Torre Mayor flexed its hydraulics, absorbing the energy, keeping all of its occupants safe, and this super tough building completely intact.
Torre Mayor is really kind of a landmark in terms of making skyscrapers more resistant to earthquakes.
Torre Mayor is theoretically and practically the best place to be in case of an earthquake in Mexico City.
Torre Mayor, with its earthquake-resisting suspension, is the world's most extreme.